Time to get going. Hello. Hello. I get rid of this stuff. Okay. We are going to continue our study in the book of Genesis. We actually only have 2 teachings left, one after tonight. Tonight, our kind of main idea we're going to think about is how we respond to suffering. So let me pray for us and we'll get going. Lord, thank you that you've given us your word. Thank you that you give us stories. This is a really awesome story that we're going to read tonight, and I pray that you would speak to us through it. Amen. All right, so we are in Genesis, and we've been following this family of people, and where the family leads us next is this guy named Joseph. Okay, and Joseph has a family that we need to know a little bit about. It's going to help us really understand this story well. And like any family, they have pros and cons. Joseph's family, on one hand, his dad loved him very much and his mom, and that was a really good thing. However, as we studied last week, he actually had 4 wives and 12 kids, and he ignored all of the kids except for Rachel and Joseph. So he has a bunch of brothers, Joseph does, and they all kind of hate him because, you know, like a dad plays favorites. This is like that to the extreme. He really loves Joseph and maybe not anyone else. Joseph's dad, Jacob, did teach him about God, and that was sweet. And his family is a part of God's plan to save humanity, which we've been tracking over the last several weeks, right? Starting with Abraham, now we're down to Joseph, and Joseph's going to be a big part in God's word spreading way beyond this little family. But it's more bad than good. When Joseph was 6, he had to flee from 2 murderous uncles. Imagine how that'll affect your psyche, right? You thought you had problems. This dude had to run away as a young child. Then his sister gets raped by foreigners, and Jacob literally does nothing about it. Right? Imagine that. Imagine your stepsister getting raped and your dad doing nothing. Well, his brothers were very upset about it, and so they talked to the whole town of guys who did this, and they were like, hey. You guys did that. You want to marry my sister? Because that's what they said. Hey, we would like to this one guy was like, I want to marry her now. They're like, oh, okay, cool. That's sweet. We're Jews, and Jews get circumcised, so you need to do that. So they all are like, oh, yeah, for sure. If you don't know what circumcision is, ask your neighbor, whatever. They all do it, and without modern anesthesia, that process is probably pretty painful. And while they're all recovering, in the midst of that, the brothers go and massacre the whole town. Kill them all, right? So, you thought you were coming to a Bible teaching. We have Game of Thrones instead. So as they're fleeing, their mom dies in childbirth. Like Joseph's mom dies giving birth. Because of this whole craziness, she's pregnant. She dies on the run, gives birth to this kid named Benjamin, who we'll learn about next week. And then his oldest brother has sex with one of his dad's wives to punish dad because he's mad at him. It's just like, what? Like, what are we talking about? This guy Reuben is like, I want dad to like my mom the best, so I'm going to go sleep with with my stepmom, so he doesn't like her. So you can kind of see like that Jacob's family is really dysfunctional, right? His brothers hate Joseph, that's another thing. So this is a really dysfunctional family, right? Like Joseph is going to need to go to counseling, and his counselor's probably never going to counsel anyone ever again, right? He doesn't want anything to do with this. I bring this up because I think some of us can relate to having a dysfunctional family, and what we're going to see in this story is that God can redeem any starting point and even redeem any family, right, and use them in really powerful ways. And we're going to see that through the story of Joseph, which I would say is the coolest story in the entire Old Testament. Let's go into Genesis 37. This is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brother was doing. So we immediately learned that Joseph is a rat, right? And his brothers don't like him for that. Hey, Dad, hey, did you see that Asher was kicking the goats today? Hey, Dad, did you see that Gad was peeing in the pig's bucket? Hey, Dad, did you see that Reuben just slept with my stepmom? Right? He's just like they're constantly tattling, and his brothers really don't. I hate that guy. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, this beautiful robe, right? Isn't that cool? All these other brothers are like, I just want my dad to care about me. And Jacob's like, hey, I'm going to make Joseph a special robe, and meanwhile, I've never gotten a birthday gift for any of my other kids. That's the kind of favoritism that we're talking about here. So his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. You know, these brothers, they're suffering. They're suffering. Their dad is a bad parent, does not love them, does not care for them. They couldn't even say a kind word to Joseph. You ever been like that? You ever been so jealous of someone that you can't even say something nice to them? Right? You ever just felt so frustrated with someone that you can't say something nice? That's where they're at. And one night, Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Said, hey, guys, listen to this dream. It's awesome. We were out in a field tying up bundles of grain, and suddenly my bundle stood up, and all of yours bowed low before mine. Isn't that cool? That's really cool, isn't it? They were like, wait, you think you're going to be our king? Do you actually think you'll reign over us? Right? They're angry, right? They're like, so you think your dream, you're going to be the ruler over us? He was one of the youngest, so they would have been really upset about this. They hated him all the more because of his dreams and because of his words. You ever hated someone so much that the thought of hearing their voice just makes you mad, right? That's where they're at with Joseph. Soon, Joseph had another dream, and we get the sense that he's pretty dense because he tells his brothers about it again. Listen, guys, I had another dream. The sun, moon, and 11 stars all bowed low before me. Hey, there's 11 of you guys. Isn't that cool? That's pretty awesome, isn't it? They're really upset about it. The sun and the moon referring to his parents as well. And his brothers are really jealous of Joseph, but his father wondered what the dreams meant. Yeah, Dad's like, what's going on here? Right? Like, what are we talking about here? But the brothers are really jealous. And this kind of gets at one way that we can respond to suffering, and that's envy. Envy. What is envy? Dictionary definition: painful or resentful awareness of an advantage enjoyed by another person, joined with the desire to possess that same advantage, right? It's not just that you recognize that someone has an advantage over you, because then we just praise them for it. Oh, Joseph, you're the only son that Dad loves. Sweet, good for you. That's awesome. I'm so happy for you, right? It's combined with this desire or this anger, this pain, right? This resentment that gets tied to it. It says, because you have an advantage that I want, I hate you for it, right? And I want that from you. I want what you possess. We all get this. We all feel this. You know, we think about, oh, yeah, oh, that guy that I've wanted to date forever just asked you out. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, that's awesome. So happy for you. Oh, you got accepted to that college and you got a full ride? Oh, they rejected my application. I'm so happy for you. That's so awesome. Oh, you can eat whatever you want and you're totally in great shape. Oh, yeah, I'm going to like that post. That's great. That's really good for you. I'm really happy for you, right? Like, we get envious about things. We get frustrated that people have advantages that we want. Usually they're good desires, but with an evil twist. And the thing about envy is that we get trapped and imprisoned in our own minds. We get trapped in anger. We get trapped in frustration. It leads us to decisions that we often lead to regret. And here's what people who struggle with envy don't get. And I speak to myself here more than anyone. When you're struggling with envy, what we don't see is that our problem is with God, not with the other person, right? In the brothers' case, their problem is with God, not with Joseph. Joseph didn't decide to be born by Rachel. Joseph didn't tell his dad as an infant, hey, you need to love me more than anyone else. Joseph didn't decide to be the key cog in God's plan, right? He didn't pick any of these things. They're things that God arranged for him. And so people who struggle with envy, they get so angry at people who can't actually do anything to fix their situation, right? Other people can't make you happier. They can't make you fitter. They can't make you more attractive. They can't get you into that college. Yet we get angry with them and we stay there in a mental state instead of thinking about, what does God want to do with me, right? That's the question that Joseph's brothers never asked. What does God want to do in my life? They never got there. And so because they get stuck in their jealousy, it leads them to a decision they'll regret for the rest of their lives. And quite frankly, that's something that we need to think about too. If we struggle with envy and we let that go unchecked, that can lead to some decisions that we will regret for a very long time. Let's see what it was for them. Soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem, where they just massacred a whole town, but whatever, send them up there. And so Jacob sends Joseph after them, and when Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in a distance. That stupid coat. Hate that guy, And as he approached him, they made plans to kill him. Whoa, that escalated quickly, right? Like, okay, we want to kill him now. Okay. Here comes the dreamer, they said. They're so mad at him. They're so envious that they can't even say his name anymore. Let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father that a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams, right? Can you see how pissed they are about this? They're so angry that they're ready to kill their brother. Well, Reuben says, hey, let's not kill him. We don't need to do that. So when he arrives, instead, they just rip off his beautiful robe, beat him, bloody him, and then throw him into the cistern instead. No big deal. It's not a big difference. They're like, you know what, guys, we're pretty hungry. Let's sit down to eat. And they see a caravan of camels coming in the distance. And that's not the only thing going on in the background. Okay, we learn later on in this book, they say, we saw how distressed Joseph was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we wouldn't listen. Right, think about this scene. Joseph is screaming, guys, help me! Help! Please don't kill me! Please don't let me die! Please don't let me just struggle here and let me just starve and die! And they're like, so what are you doing later tonight? And they're just like eating their breakfast or whatever. It's like kind of crazy that they're just sitting there and just totally ignoring what Joseph has to say. And Judah comes to his senses. He says to his brothers, hey, what do we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's just sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother. He is our flesh and blood. Guys, come on. It's our brother. Let's not kill him. Let's just sell him to slave traders so they can kill him. Come on. That's so much better. They clearly, he's misguided, right? He's just saying, I just want to cover my own butt here. And so Joseph's brothers pull him out of the cistern and sell him for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders take him to Egypt. Okay. So we're saying here, these guys, their jealousy led them to a decision to sell their brother into slavery. What did they get out of it? 2 pieces of silver each. I hope that pain on your conscience was worth it. I hope it was worth 2 pieces of silver. We'll see. We'll see whether that's the case. The brothers killed a young goat and dipped Joseph's robe in the blood, and they sent the beautiful robe to their father with this message. Look at what we found. Doesn't this robe belong to your son? And Jacob, of course, recognizes it and goes into a tailspin, weeping, struggling. And his brothers try to comfort him. In the ultimate act of hypocrisy, they say, Dad, it'll be okay. We know he's dead, but it'll be okay, right? They're hiding it. They won't admit it. And this comes to plague them for the next 20 years as Jacob thinks that his son is dead. Brutal. They never come up with the sense to be able to say, no, we did this. This was our fault. He's actually somewhere else. We sold him to some slave traders. They never do that. This is ironic. If you remember last week, Jacob actually deceived his dad, right? He deceived his dad into blessing him, and now here Jacob's sons are deceiving him into something that he doesn't know is true. It reminds me of a verse in Luke 6, with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. I wonder if God is kind of signaling to Jacob, I didn't approve of the way you did that, and now you're being deceived just like you deceived your own dad. While Joseph, we're just going to focus on him the rest of the night. We'll get back to his family next week. He was taken to Egypt and purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and the Lord was with Joseph. It's a strange phrase. Joseph just got beaten by his brothers. He's naked. He's enslaved. He just got sold to some guy who, in a language that he doesn't speak. But the Lord is with him. So what? So Potiphar set him free and sent him back to Israel, and his brothers forgave him, and they apologized, and everything was great. No, actually, that's not what happens. It says, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. When we talk about the Lord being with us, that's an easy thing to say when we're succeeding. But for Joseph, he's a slave. His future's bleak. He has no real rights at this point, and he's in a foreign nation without really much hope of how he's ever going to get back to his family or how that dream's going to be accomplished of him ruling over people. Right? There's no real picture of how he's going to get to that point. And yet, the author affirms to us strongly that the Lord is with him. What does that mean? That means for us, right, that there are going to be times when we feel so alone, so broken, so weak, so helpless that it seems like God has left us. It seems like God has left us and he's not there anymore and he doesn't want anything to do with us. And this passage is a firm affirmation that is not true. Right? God being with us is not dictated by the circumstances around us, in other words, and we have to be able to cling to that. So Potiphar noticed that God was with him, realized the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything that he did, and this pleased Potiphar. So he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything that he owned. That's pretty cool. It's not the best. I mean, it could have been better, but he's second in command of a powerful man's home. And Potiphar is not the only person who realized or recognized something about Joseph, because we read in our next verse, Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man. And Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. And she's extremely subtle. So her next line is, "Come sleep with me," she demanded. So she is like aggressive and powerful. And look, she's married to a powerful dude in Egypt, so she's probably hot. Like, just and this is a 17, 18-year-old dude who's being told, hey, come and have sex with me. 18-year-old dudes are not known for denying propositions for sex. So what happens? Joseph refused. Who would have thought? Look, he told her, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He's held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God. Okay, 18-year-old guys are not known for denying this opportunity. They're especially not known for then telling the person who wants to have sex with them about God. Wow, okay, Joseph is a rare breed, apparently. So Joseph tells her about God, says, look, I can't do this. He's fleeing, right? He's running from sexual sin. That's a good tip. He's running away, saying, I refuse this. But she kept putting pressure on him day after day, right? She was not one to just give up easily. But he refused to sleep with her and kept out of her way as much as he possibly could. But one day, when no one else was around, he went in to do his work, and she came and grabbed him by the cloak, demanding, come on, sleep with me. Right? Like, she's persuasive, I guess. And Joseph tore himself away, but left his cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. Loses his cloak. For the second time, he loses his robe, and for the second time, that's going to cause him a lot of problems. When she saw that she was holding his cloak as she fled, she went, look, my husband has brought this Hebrew slave here to make fools of us. He came into my room to rape me, but I screamed, right? You can hear Joseph from the corner like, that's Cap, come on, what are we talking about? I did not do that. But the text doesn't indicate that he had any opportunity to defend himself. And this is hard, right? Like, Joseph is suffering in a very extreme way. He's about to be falsely accused of rape. And what is he supposed to do? Like, he's getting no opportunity to even defend himself. It's really hard when you're suffering and when you get screwed over to be able to trust that God is going to be able to work it out for good. I think about this verse. Do not take revenge, my dear friends. Leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. Sometimes we get screwed over, right? And we suffer as a result, and it wasn't actually our fault. And it's really hard to trust God and say, God will work this out fairly in the end. But that's a lesson we see in Joseph. He was willing to do that, willing to see what is God going to do through this, instead of just giving up. Well, Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her. Note that he doesn't say who he's furious with. It says in the next verse, he took Joseph and threw him into prison. Look, if you tried to rape a high-ranking official's wife, you would be killed instantly. There's a sense here that maybe Potiphar knew that his wife's story was not completely honest. Maybe he knew that, and so he didn't have Joseph killed, he just had him thrown into prison. Regardless, the point here is Joseph is suffering for doing right, and what we can add to the list of his own suffering, human trafficking, sexual harassment, sexual assault, slander, wrongful termination, and unjust incarceration. Oh, man. Talk about a struggle, right? This is all the stuff that he's going through. How is he supposed to maintain his faith in God? The God who said he was going to make him a ruler, now he's in prison. Well, the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love and got him out of the prison, and he escaped and went home to Israel where he lived the rest of his days. No, it's not what happened. The Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. And before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of the prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. He was a really good prisoner and became the lead prisoner, whatever that means in Egypt. And so God's still with him, right? It's not about his circumstances. God is with him. And what's kind of interesting here is that Joseph isn't letting his circumstances change the fact that he's going to be a hard worker and he's going to make the most of his situation. I think a lot of times when we go through suffering, I know when I go through suffering, I'm just tempted to self-pity. I'm tempted to feel sorry for myself. I'm tempted just to blame other people for my circumstances. And I'm definitely not going to work really hard, right, in the midst of that. And I'm definitely not going to avoid complaining about what's befallen me. We get no sense of that from Joseph. We get the sense that he actually really trusts what God said, and he's continuing to serve people and tell people about God and work hard. Well, what happens next is that Joseph stays in prison for another decade. So we'll see how that works out. He started this journey 17 years old when he got sold into slavery. Now he's 28 as we read our next verse, Genesis 40. Sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended their royal master. Obviously, Pharaoh's baker, he bakes. He must have made a bad baguette or something, I don't know. And the chief cupbearer would drink the wine to make sure that it wasn't poisoned. So that was a really good job until it wasn't when he died because someone poisoned it. But you got to eat a lot of good food until then, at the very least. And Pharaoh became angry with these two officials and put them in the prison where Joseph was. And what happens is these guys have a dream. They both have different dreams. And they come to Joseph and they say, hey, we had these dreams. They're really weird. What do you think about it? And Joseph's like, hey, actually, God can interpret dreams. Let me tell you what's going to happen. And he does, and we read that Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later. He prepared this banquet. He restored the chief cupbearer out of jail to his former position, but Pharaoh impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had predicted when he interpreted his dream. Okay, so Joseph interpreted these dreams that these guys had. It happens exactly as he said. And what Joseph told the cupbearer, because he's like, hey, you're going to get out. Please, for the love of all things good, remember me. Please remember. I should not be here. I have been here for 11 years in jail, and I'm not supposed to be here. I got kidnapped. I haven't really done anything wrong this whole time. Please remember me. And so his prediction happens, and he's probably like, yes, I'm going to get out. The cupbearer is going to remember. So a day goes by, and he's like, when's the warden going to come down and let me out? It doesn't happen. 2 days go by. Okay, there's probably some paperwork. Okay, it'll be okay. It's going to happen. Day 3, nothing. 1 week, cynicism starts to set in. 2 weeks, man, what is going on here? And you could sense probably that he probably starting to get a little bit frustrated, at least you would think. How much time passes until Joseph realizes what we read? Pharaoh's chief cupbearer forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. Never even thought about him again. Man, that's rough. How much time passes that he's in jail? 2 full years later. Joseph is 30 years old. He has been a slave or he has been a prisoner for his entire adult life. For the last 13 years, he's now a 30-year-old man. And you just got to think, at what point does Joseph break? At what point does he say, that promise that God made me, that was foolish, that was dumb, and at this point, I should just do whatever I can for myself. I may have resisted Potiphar's wife because I trusted what God said, but at this point, I just need to get whatever I can for myself, right? Why is God making Joseph wait? Why can't God make him the ruler that he said he was going to make him? Why couldn't the cupbearer remember him? What's up with that? We get some insight in Psalm 105. It says, God sent someone to Egypt ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. That's interesting. So God in some way is behind this. God in some way is working through this. Until the time came to fulfill Joseph's dreams, the Lord tested Joseph's character. God was using the suffering that Joseph was going through to train him, to prepare him, to test him, right? In some kind of way to prepare him for something greater. And Joseph had really no idea, right? He had these 2 dreams. He's like, God was saying something. I'm not exactly sure what. But what God does oftentimes to us is he makes us wait. God gives us promises, right? We have promises in the Bible. Things that he says are going to be true of us. Your life is going to be holy and blessed. You're going to feel really good, right? You're going to feel joy. There's going to be excitement. You're going to bear fruit for God. There's a lot of different things that we talk about week by week in our Bible studies. But a lot of times it's like, God, why aren't you coming through for me? Why isn't anything happening? And oftentimes it's easy to say, God, what have you done for me lately? Which would have been really easy for Joseph to say, right, when he's being tempted to have sex with Potiphar's wife. He could have said, hey, God, I know that you say this thing about having sex being in a committed marital relationship and that adultery is very bad, but what have you done for me lately? Because I'm in slavery right now, and I don't think that was very cool, and no one's even here to watch me anyway, so I may as well just do it. He didn't do that. He learned something through that, right? This temptation taught him something, and then this waiting period also taught him something about God, and it really molded him and made him into a man who could prepare for something greater. I like what this author says, who wrote a book about Joseph. He says that it takes real character to distinguish between God's no and God's not yet. I think it's something we need to think about, because when we're going through suffering, it's easy you feel tempted to give up. God's not with me anymore. God's out of the picture. If God really loved me, I wouldn't be suffering like this. What do we see? What do we see in the story of Joseph? It's not no. It's not I'm gone. It's not I'm out of the picture. It's not yet. I will fulfill that blessing. We're just not there yet. It's coming, though. And it's coming in a way bigger way than you ever could have imagined. Often the case with us, too. I feel like God's never going to come through for me, and then he does something incredibly miraculous, way beyond what we could have thought or imagined. We read in Genesis 41 that those 2 years later, Pharaoh dreamed he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. And in his dream, he saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the Nile River. He sees these fat cows, right? And he's like... And then after the 7 cows, these 7 gross, skinny cows come up. And in his dream, the 7 skinny cows eat the 7 fat cows, but they don't gain any weight. It just disappears. Just goes right through them. And Pharaoh wakes up from his dream like, oh, God. Oh, that was scary. He's like sweating. Oh, just a dream. Okay, it's okay. Goes back to sleep. And he has the same dream with pieces of wheat. He sees 7 really great pieces of wheat, and then he sees 7 bad ones that somehow eat the 7 good ones, but they stay dead. And Pharaoh's like, what is going on? He's very disturbed by these dreams. So he calls for all the magicians and all the wise men of Egypt. And when Pharaoh told them his dreams, not one of them could tell him what they meant. Pharaoh's starting to get upset. I want to know what these dreams mean. He had this idea that the gods were trying to speak to him through these dreams. And the king's chief cupbearer is like, oh, yeah. Hey, today I've been reminded of my failure, Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's like, failure? What? Right? That's usually something you kill people over. And he says, hey, there's this guy. I met this guy. It was kind of crazy, right? It's like when you hear a story about someone and they're kind of like, yeah, I met this dude down the corner of Parsons and Livingston. And, he was like really cool and it was sweet. And he did this crazy thing. It was really wild. You're like, oh, what? Like, what's going on here? The cupbearer's like, hey, I know this guy. He interprets dreams. He interpreted my dream. It was really cool. He also interpreted the baker's dream. What if maybe you could interpret your dream? Pharaoh, that could be pretty cool. Pharaoh's like, yes, definitely. Send for Joseph at once. He was quickly brought from the prison, and after he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before Pharaoh. Whoa, this is not what he was expecting. And honestly, if you're Joseph, you might be like, okay, how am I going to suffer now? Now I'm standing before the most powerful man in the most powerful nation in the world at this time. What's going to happen now? What possibly could happen this time? Well, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. But I've heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. Well, Joseph says, it's beyond my power to do this, but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. Okay, this is really interesting. Okay, Joseph, it's been 13 years, right, since he had this dream, this set of dreams. But he still believes that God works through these dreams. Right? You would think, I think it would be very easy to say, God doesn't work through dreams, okay? Like, there's no point in even doing this. I think in some sense, Joseph still believes what God had promised to him years ago. He still had trust in the fact that God was speaking to him, and God would bring that to pass. Otherwise, he would have told him that dreams don't matter, and that God doesn't speak that way. So Pharaoh told him his dreams, and Joseph responded, both of Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. God is telling Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. And what Joseph tells him is that those 7 plump cows, they were referring to 7 years of prosperity that were coming in the nation of Egypt. But the 7 gaunt ones were 7 years of extreme famine that were going to overtake the prosperity, make people forget that the prosperity had even happened. And so Joseph says, hey, Pharaoh, you should find an intelligent and wise man, maybe there's someone around here who could do this, and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Maybe have them gather all the food produced in the good years that are just ahead. That way there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt. He doesn't put himself out there, but he's like, you do need someone to do this. You shouldn't have to do this yourself. And Pharaoh says, can we find anyone else like this guy? So obviously filled with the Spirit of God, right? Joseph really stood out. I wonder if we can say the same, right? In our communities, in our workplaces, in our environments, in our schools, that there's something different about that guy. Because that was the case for Potiphar, that was the case for the prison warden, and now it's the case for Pharaoh. This guy is so clearly different. We should put him in charge. It says, God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you. No one is as intelligent or as wise as you are. And so he said, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he began serving in the court of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. What a turn of events, right? This guy suffered for 13 years and had every reason to believe God is never, ever going to come through for me. He's never, ever going to do what he promised he would do. And he knew a lot less about God than we do. And I would have given up a lot earlier than he did. He didn't. He didn't give up. And what happened? He is second in command and the most powerful nation in the world at this time. Everyone bows their knee to him, including Potiphar and his wife, for instance. They're all subject to him now. He is the most powerful man out there, and he's telling everyone about God, right? If you think about how was God going to start with this one guy, Abraham, and tell tons of people about his message of forgiveness and what he's like, this is getting that process going, right? This guy who believes in God is the second most powerful person in Egypt. Really crazy. Really crazy. God worked in this crazy way. And so we pause here. We're going to finish the story next week because things aren't over for Joseph and his family. We're going to see what happens. We don't have time for that. We're going to do that next week. So what we'll do to finish out here is we're going to talk about some lessons. What can we learn from this? A first lesson is that when Joseph's brothers suffered, they only viewed it from their perspective. They only saw it in terms of things without God really in the picture. They never wondered what God's plan was for them. Instead, they just had their anger consume them. It led them to a terrible decision that they would regret for the rest of their lives. Right? I think envy might make sense if God doesn't exist. And just being angry with people for having things that we don't have, it might make sense if God does not exist. But it didn't work out for them. They were trapped in a prison in their minds. You could argue that their suffering was worse than Joseph's because they were plagued with guilt, right? Have you ever felt guilt like that, right, where you just feel so bad about something and you keep holding on to it? They went through that for 2 decades, right? Constant guilt. And that's what happens when anger consumes us. We make decisions that we regret. We leave relationships in a trail of dust, and we do things that we honestly regret doing. If God does exist and God does have a plan for your life, that doesn't mean that people just necessarily have an advantage over us. Might they have things that we want? Absolutely, absolutely. Are there things that we might want to strive to get that other people have? Sure. Might that be in God's plan for us? Definitely. But if God does exist and does have a plan for our life, that does change everything when it comes to envy. Because that means that instead of me being angry with so-and-so that they have what I don't, I can ask God, what do you have for me? Right? Because God does have a good plan for all of us. We read about that in Ephesians 2:10, that God has a good plan for every single person here. Joseph's brothers never stopped to ask that. Will you? Will you do that when you're suffering, or will you let anger take over the way that you operate? Joseph, on the other hand, when he suffered, he viewed it from the Lord's perspective. He knew God was always there, and he knew God's way was the right way. Whether he was the favorite son, whether he was a slave in Egypt, whether he was a prisoner for 12 years, and whether he was the second most powerful man in the world, he knew God's way was the right way, and he always lived by that. Was he perfect? No. But did he always let God's truth lead the way that he was going to live? Definitely. And through that suffering that Joseph went through, he was prepared to take this role and honestly save his family. Right? Because where did Joseph learn the administrative skills to take care of the whole nation of Egypt and come up with this brilliant plan? Where did he learn that? He learned it when he was a slave, and he took control of Potiphar's house. He learned it when he was in jail, and he took care of the prison. He learned these skills during his suffering that led to him having this incredibly prosperous position. And so because Joseph suffered well and suffered faithfully, God transformed him and the watching world in a big way. And we're going to see more about that next week. A last lesson is that there's a lot we can learn about Jesus, the central character of the Bible, from the story of Joseph. They both did the right thing and suffered for it. They both were faithful during their suffering. They both were sold for pieces of silver into their ultimate imprisonment and, in Jesus' case, his death. And their family's hatred led to the salvation or the saving of that same family, right? It's funny. Joseph's brothers thought that they were just selling him into slavery to get rid of him for the rest of their life. But the next time we see them, they're going to be coming and bowing before him, asking for grain because their family is about to die of starvation. So actually, them selling Joseph into slavery, in a way, saved their lives. Because if Joseph isn't in Egypt, who interprets the dream? And if there's no one to interpret the dream, no one makes this plan to save all the wheat. And if no one saves the wheat, a lot of people die, including Joseph's family. So in a way, God used this hatred to save the family. And in the same way, God came to this world, to his family, to us, to people that he loves, that he created. And we rejected him, right? His people rejected him. And they said, you know what we think about the fact that you claim to be God? We're going to kill you for it. That's what they do. That's what the Jews do in his community. They kill him. And what happens as a result of his death, right? It leads to anyone being able to be saved, anyone being able to go to heaven for the rest of their life simply by asking for that death to cover their sins, to pay, to forgive them. That's something that any of us can have tonight. So, that's a lot, but that's all we got for tonight. So, I have some questions up here. We're going to do some Q&A. And then so what I was thinking about here, and you could say something different if you want, but we're thinking about how to suffer with God's perspective or only our own perspective. So maybe you could answer one of these. What tips might you offer to someone to begin viewing their suffering from God's perspective, or how could